Hello and good morning from Brussels. We are streaming live from Housing Europe Centre, the base of Housing Europe's advocacy headquarters here in the capital of Europe. Very nice that you could join us here this morning. This webinar, where we will take 90 minutes to take a deep dive into what is quite pressing issue, particularly when we come into the colder season, when bringing down bills at the same time as bringing down carbon emissions is really a priority here at the EU level. This webinar will be dedicated to the topic of renewable energy sharing at local level in the public, cooperative and social housing sector, supporting the global energy transition. And this actually is the first, I'm very proud to present, it's the first in a new series of webinars that Housing Europe is organising. And that series is really focusing on how we can make sure that the flagship of the European Union, so the Green Deal, the mission to make our continent energy neutral by the year 2050. So to make sure that the Green Deal is also a vehicle to bring better housing conditions, to help us in the mission of having decent housing for all. And of course, when we talk about decent housing, it's very closely linked with energy. So we talk about availability, affordability, and sustainability. But when we talk about this aspect of decent housing, it's key to look at the aspect of energy, because a house is not decent if it does not give us the capacity to heat and to cool at a livable temperature, and of course to light and to cook, all basic ingredients of what we describe as a decent home. So we're going to kick off this first in our series of webinars, so Innovation Bites, this morning, and to give us an introduction and an overview of the Energy to Peers project. So Energy to Peers is a project we've been working with partners on to forward this goal of energy sharing at local level. We're going to welcome Tim Walters, my colleague here at Housing Europe, to give us an overview onto the project and into the policy sphere. So I'm going to welcome Tim here.
Yes. Sorry, I don't think this one's yet.
There we go.
Okay, yes, exactly. So what are we actually going to be talking about today? I think primarily what we want to focus on is how energy communities can really help to alleviate energy poverty. What is our role in the sector? How does the EU recognize this? And yeah, what might potential barriers be, or current barriers be in that sense? So I'm already going to answer my question. The EU does recognize the potential for the renewable energy communities. This is, for example, outlined in the Renewable Energy Directive, which is really the base for energy communities. And it recognizes the impact of energy communities on alleviating energy poverty, and also obliges member states to include vulnerable household and social housing inhabitants within this. Yeah. However, the transposition of the Renewable Energy Directive has not been done fully in all member states. It's either incomplete or it's not up to snuff. So yeah, that might create some issues. But next to this, there's also more points where we might find energy communities within the EU sphere. So that's in the Repower EU strategy, which underlines that, again, vulnerable and social housing tenants should have access to solar energy through, for example, energy communities or certain forms of self-consumption. Beyond that, the European Commission recently released this recommendation, energy poverty, where it really underlined this need for a switch from a more top-down, centralized form of energy systems to more locally adapted decentralized forms, particularly because the former was not able to shield vulnerable households from increasing prices or increasing energy prices in the past couple of years. So yeah, member states should adopt a socially integrated form or strategy to tackle energy poverty and include, again, vulnerable households and social housing tenants. Beyond that, you also have the Energy Efficiency Directive, which actually establishes a definition of energy poverty. And beyond that, it also puts an obligation on member states to achieve a certain set target of energy savings for, among others, vulnerable households and social housing tenants. And again, energy communities is one of the tools to achieve this. Yeah, so to summarize, there's a lot of discussion happening at the EU on this topic, on the potential of energy communities, and also recognition of our sector as key actors in this. However, as I said before, the implementation is not always adequate enough, which makes it so there's often little support for prospective or current energy communities, and they also face a large amount of barriers, either regulatory or legislative, or for legislative things. So yeah, one of the organizations which has, or one of the projects that has tried to deal with this, Energy to Peers, which you've already introduced, it's really one of the main aims is overcoming these barriers and capacity building. So yeah, as it says here, the main aim is to support the uptake of next generation European peer-to-peer energy communities. And it does this by creating a creating a gamified platform which supports residential energy communities to increase energy efficiency and integrate a higher share of renewable energy. So for that, there's 5 measurable objectives. It's enhancing, again, the rollout of peer-to-peer energy communities in Europe, strengthen the user-friendliness of these communities, make them be more easily accessible for at least 10K residential customers and a wide range of other stakeholders, highlight the business case of these energy communities, and motivate and activate EU interest groups or national bodies that deal with these issues. It does so through, for example, these 2 specific tools where you can test the readiness level of your energy community, or if you want to start an energy community or look for advice. Regarding looking for advice, you have the Energy to Peers advisory app, which is really this online hub where you can ask questions, share best practices, network, and really help to find how to overcome these barriers through the help of others. And next to that, you also have the readiness level framework, as I said, which is where you can test your community's readiness level, or if you want to start an energy community, which barriers or which points should you probably work on? Is that on the digital front or on the social capital front? So yeah, for me, that's my introduction. Hopefully I've framed it well. For anyone who's interested, you can take a look at energytopeers.eu. And looking forward to the other speakers. Looking interesting.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Tim. I think you've framed a little bit the policy context and the Energy to Peers initiative, which is working indeed to make sure that the ambitions in the legislation at European level actually turn into real projects on the ground and to achieving our aim of lowering the energy, the carbon footprint of the housing stock as well. So you touched on a really important point there, the fact that indeed over the last years we've seen, unfortunately, that vulnerable consumers have not been protected by indeed the volatility. So we're going to move on now, and we're going to hear a little bit from local level, from France and Sweden. So hopefully that will also help you in the continuation of your work in Energy to Peers. So we're going to hear, okay, how is the local level actually perceiving this legislation? Is it something useful for them? and how can it be improved so that the good practices on the ground can be multiplied. So we're going to, with that goal, thank you very much for setting the scene. And we're going to welcome now an input from France and then from Sweden. So first of all, kicking off is going to be Karine Puyol. So she is representing l'Union Sociale pour l'Habitat, which brings together all of the social, public and cooperative housing providers in France. And so Karine is going to describe a little bit how this part of the puzzle, so this local energy production, has indeed been identified by Union Sociale pour l'Habitat as one of the ways to indeed decrease energy prices for people living in those homes, while at the same time reducing carbon emissions. So Karine, give us a taste of what's happening on the ground in France, please.
Thank you, Soraka. Thank you for the invitation. So indeed, representing today Union Sociale pour l'Habitat, which is the French Federation of Social Housing. So we are the French member of Housing Europe. So indeed, there is an evolution on this subject of the capacity of social housing provider to be a producer of energy. Could it be possible to have the slides? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Perfect.
Great.
So this is Emmanuel Cos, the president of Union Sociale pour l'Habitat. And in the last HLM Congress, in her introductory speech, she said that in the coming months, USH will support the creation of an alliance of social housing provider for the production of the renewable energies, because the movement is convinced by the role that social housing provider could play in this field.
Positive development.
Yeah, exactly. So why indeed energy for social housing in France, but all around Europe, is a key issue. For them, it is, as Tim said, and you also in the introduction, is the issue to decrease and stabilize the electricity prices for tenants and the energy prices in general. Is a way to reduce the carbon emission from the residential sector and also the energy consumption of the building. And the further point, we would like to contribute to the energy production at the local level. And this has been accelerated by the emergency due to the global crisis. So energy communities in France and in our sector is one of the solutions, not the only one, but one of the solutions to boost the local energy production. Is a way to have low and stable prices, specifically for electricity, and is a way also to be less vulnerable to face energy crisis.
Ticking all the boxes.
Yes,
indeed.
So USH elaborates different tools to help our member. So we published in June 2023 a guide on production d'énergie et autoconsommation. In French, we speak about autoconsommation. We don't speak a lot about energy communities. The French word is autoconsommation.
That's important. Indeed, terminology can make a difference.
Indeed, yes. And in this guide, you have, it's a way to support our members who are interested by energy community. So it gives advices about the way to identify buildings who could welcome the solar, the photovoltaic panel in their roof. It gives advice about the relationship with the stakeholders. And so it gives a lot of information about the way to implement the best energy communities, because in France we have 5 possibilities in terms of to implement this type of project. The first one is just to produce electricity by your solar panels, and you send it to the grid. But you have also the possibility to implement this and to hit the common, to produce electricity for the common part, only the common part.
Only the shared parts of the building.
Indeed, and after that you have the possibility to produce electricity for the common part plus the drillings. So you have to think about the type of contract and the repartition of electricity between these different parts. And there is also the possibility to produce electricity for the common part, the individual drillings, and to share it also with other buildings, yes, in a neighborhood. And in this type of solution, you have also different contracts to sign, a lot of things to organize. It's not quite simple, but we observe evolution of the French law to push in this direction. And the third part of this guide is how to ensure that this community, energy community, will have a long life. So you have to think about the training of the tenants. You have to think about the maintenance of the buildings and so on. We have also another tool. It is a decision support tool for organismes HLM. So it's an Excel file for our members. So you have a social housing members who are interested by a community, energy community. So you enter all the data you have on the buildings. So on the size of the roof, the capacity of production, the size of the dwellings, and so on. And this tool will compare 5 possible scenarios. So it's very practical. You have 2 type of tool, a simple one, just for a social housing organization who are just interested by the subject and would like to have information for building, and a more advanced tool with a lot of technical information, economic and social. So it could, yes, be interesting to share this type of tool with other partners.
So this is the capacity building carried out by the central federation to the members, to the local housing providers.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's a way, yes, to support our members, to help them if they would want to promote this type of vision. So at the end, what happened on the ground? So to be, yes, there is not so much energy communities supported by a social housing provider in France, but we have some organizations who put in place this type of project. So one is Les Souffleurs. It's in the city of Bordeaux, and it's promoted by Gironde Habitat. And the objective of the project is, of course, to fight against energy insecurity and improve the well-being of the tenants. So 54 solar panels have been installed on the roof of the building for 60 homes. So it's quite important in terms of numbers of dwellings. So the first step, the first phase of the project is to provide electricity for common spaces. And at the end, the annual savings per year is 70 euros. It has been evaluated by the enterprise. And the second phase of the project is to provide electricity directly to the tenants. And this second phase has been implemented in 2021. So it's quite new. And for that, a legal entity has been created by the producers, so the buildings owned by the social energy provider, and the consumer, so it means the tenants. This legal entity is named les souffleurs. So, and we have other projects, but this one is the more advanced.
So indeed, this is one of the examples where you have gone beyond
Yeah.
the production for common spaces and have actually involved residents, tenants,
Yeah.
crucially, because this is one of the challenges to go beyond just homeowners in Europe accessing local energy production. And you have managed that by establishing this legal entity.
Yeah, exactly.
Moving forward.
So, to conclude, so to conclude, that we see that the building, we see energy community, so the capacity to produce energy at local level as a perspective to 2030, but to 2050. So the building of tomorrow will no longer be just a physical structure, but a physical structure that provides services, and the contribution of energy production will be an essential point of this. So
okay, and this is ambitious vision coming from France, so to make buildings indeed part of the energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay, and we see also the example that you give in Bordeaux, but what would be the potential? How many homes do you actually manage in the sector in France?
But we have 560, so it's 50% of the total stock at the residential building. So yes, there is a potential. But as I said in my presentation, the energy community is one of the solutions. We don't want to, we don't want to have one miracle solution, but that's one of the solutions. But it's a solution that we promote more and more.
And I think to potentially over 5 million homes in the sector in France. Yeah. No, indeed, it's a good point. We're not looking for one solution to bring down prices, tackle emissions, make homes more sustainable. But definitely this is part of the puzzle, and it's perhaps in some contexts more than others, but it has to be considered in each case.
Yeah.
Great, thanks a lot. I think it's a good story that we have this this central backing that can really upscale those local projects. Thanks a lot, Karine, for joining us. Yeah, we're going to go up north now, where probably you're already facing winter weather up there. Michael Rosen is joining us from HSB Riksförbund. So that's the Federation of Swedish housing cooperatives. So probably less solar energy you're thinking of today, looking at
the window right now. It's sunny and nice, 5-6 degrees plus, so quite okay.
So the Baltic front hasn't reached you yet. I've heard they're already facing blizzards over there.
Oh yeah, we had just a couple of weeks ago 3-4 decimeters of snow. So
okay,
it's
so
up
great.
and down.
Looking forward to hear a little bit the northern Scandinavian perspective on how this is looking for the Swedish projects. And I can or my colleague would change the slides for you. So just let us know.
Yeah, you can change the slide.
Yeah.
As I said, my name is Mikael Rosén. I work at HSB as a senior energy advisor at national level, thus representing about 4,000 cooperatives all over the country. Just for reference, about 1 in 10 Swedish citizens live in one of our apartments, either in cooperatives, or we have about 25,000 rental apartments also. So that's about 10% of our population.
Oh, just they're home ownership cooperatives, indeed.
No,
most of them, yes, but also some rental.
But just to look at some of the development where we are, within the cooperative housing, we have 30 of the 100 largest rooftop plants in the country, and also a huge amount of smaller plants. We also have the largest ground solar plant in Sweden, about 21 megawatts in power. But none of these are used for energy sharing within an energy community, so to speak. And I'll come back to that in a couple of slides, why it is like that. However, a lot of these plants are part of energy sharing concepts, but not in forms of formalized energy communities. We can take the next slide. For example, I mean, we build a lot of solar plants, rooftops, connecting buildings with microgrids. That's allowed in Sweden since a couple of years, and routing electricity through energy hubs, for example, to provide electricity for heat pumps and other electricity consuming other electricity consumers. But that's generally within the cooperative. But we can use collective metering, rebuilding the electrical systems in the building so that the solar plant also can provide electricity for the apartments. Of course, that is allowed. But in general, the electricity that's that is not self-used is just sold to the grid. So and that has
so it's not stored locally, it's sold back into the
no, it's sold back to the grid. Yeah. And also, of course, if we have heat pumps and we also have a lot of district heating in Sweden, central heating in the buildings, we don't see that as energy sharing, although it's a similar concept, but it's not per definition energy sharing like in energy communities. But we also have pilot projects and some, how should I put it, regulatory sandbox projects that we test cooperatives. Take one slide back, thank you. For example, in the south of Stockholm, about 50 cooperatives in Hammarby Sjöstad working with different test beds within a project called Electricity Innovation, but also about microgrids and flexibility markets, but also sharing electricity through the normal grid, not just the local grid, not just a microgrid between buildings. So, and this project also have test beds to look at hydrogen gas storages in combination with batteries and other storage solutions. So there are a bit more than a handful different projects around Sweden where we test this in test beds and develop solutions for energy communities. But that's
okay. So there are pilots coming up, not yet mainstreamed, but you're working on that.
Yeah, that's in general within, like I said, regulatory sandbox projects, so to speak. Yeah, we can take the next slide. Regarding different objectives and targets, we have no targets set in numerals regarding energy communities and stuff like that. Of course, we have targets for reducing energy, reducing carbon dioxide, and numeral targets for those approaches, but not numeral targets regarding RECs or energy communities in general. Our main objectives working with this is trying, because we still do not have all the legislation we need in place for this to boom, really. So we're still trying to influence for legislative measures, we work in continue developing using the methods we have today, working with microgrids, collective metering, and what we have within the national legislation so far. But also trying to work with the grid owners, the LSOs in general, to develop business models for virtual metering. Virtual metering is not within the legal framework in Sweden today, and that's one of the barriers I can see. I will come to that in the next slide, but try to go back. You can go back to the former slide. But we still can work within regulatory sandboxes, testing methods, developing business models, and try to get the local grid owners to work as facilitators. That we can do, but we still need some legislation in place as we see it. Yeah, you can take the next slide now. Looking at barriers, we see some legislative measures that we still need. We do not have legislation regarding virtual metering. Thus, it's hard to enable better use of existing grids, clustering, peer-to-peer, and that's one of the main barriers or obstacle that we see.
When you talk about the virtual meeting, so you don't have the access to the live data on the energy being produced?
We're not allowed to cluster energy users using virtual metering on the local grids.
Okay.
And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. But also within the existing legislation, we still see some uncertainties in what ways we are allowed to share energy between buildings and that. So, but there are legislation in place, for example, regarding microgrids, but we still have some uncertainties in that area. We also have it's tax regulations and tax legislation. It's more expensive to share than to use yourself. So we also need to drive for changes in tax legislation so that so it will be better levelized between own usage and sharing. But we also have work in progress regarding regulatory sandboxes. We are allowed to test projects within that is not within the legal framework, but test for shorter periods of time. So that's a good way to start, but we still need formal legislation in place regarding the former points. There are also, as I see it, a bit of barriers or obstacles regarding knowledge or markets. Still, since we don't have virtual metering and we do not have a lot of energy community projects, larger energy community projects or smaller energy community projects, there are not an extreme amount of good examples or best practice. We still have to work on business models regarding risks, costs, fairness, together with grid owners, especially. There are maybe the word resistance from grid owners is not completely accurate, but there also is a lack of knowledge how from the grid owner perspective, how to develop business models for energy sharing using local grids. So resistance or lack of knowledge, or a bit of both.
Bit of a mix. Mm-hmm.
But also we also need a bit of legislative measures and other measures, also from grid owners, looking at time-based, differentiated, reduced grid tariffs for energy sharing, and that's partly unexplored or uncharted territory, I should say. But we also have legislative boundaries we need to work with in that area. Yeah, so to sum it up, if we look at the report enabling frameworks for REC and reports and good practices, we can see from the chart on the right, we do not have that transposition in Swedish legislation and other parts that we think we should have. We're not quite there legislatively, and therefore also not in good practices, and that's partly the Renewable Energy Directive, but also the Energy Markets Directive, or Electricity Markets Directive, I should say, Article 15, where we should enabling customers to be active customers, and in Article 15 we see some parts that could be better or should be better enforced in Sweden in our perspective, especially, as I mentioned, virtual metering, so we can enable clustering and peer-to-peer, and therefore also we lack some good practice. We need to look at more projects for good practice all over Europe, especially in countries where we can see that the transposition is better, where we have good practice to look at. So we need to also build a better knowledge base. We're on the way, but not in that.
Not quite where you'd like to be yet.
Yeah, we're not in that transposition level as we would like as a cooperative to see.
Okay, so then these type of sessions are really useful for you to hear what your colleagues around Europe are doing, indeed.
Yes, very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's been really useful. I think we can safely say that HSP has, like in France, so they've also identified this as definitely part of the decarbonization path, something that's good for people living in the homes, but also good for hitting those carbon reduction targets. So that's already positive, and I think it's been really useful. You've raised quite a few issues, so you're on track, but as you say, it's not quite booming yet, and you've raised some, I think, really useful points that are going to lead us perfectly into the next part of our discussion today. So thanks, Emika. Please stay online.
Yep.
And we're going to welcome Achille Hanoset, I hope I pronounced it correctly, from DG Ener. So thanks a lot, Achille, for joining us. I know that you're involved in quite a lot of negotiations, dialogues at member state level right now. So but you managed to fit this into your day. So just what would be really nice to hear from you is really your take on those two, let's say, national perspectives that we've heard from. Obviously, I think we've heard today from two countries that, from my perspective, seem to be really pushing this and doing quite well. It's not the full picture, but it's a good, let's say, starting point for our discussion. So how do you think the stories that you've heard are, do you identify those with what you're hearing also at European level? How can we help tackle those obstacles? Or in the case of France and Sweden, how can we help move things along? Because it sounds like there's also a lot of good progress, not only obstacles that we're talking about today.
Yes, thank you very much for that question, and also for having the Commission invited for this webinar. It was fascinating to hear the first case examples in France and Sweden. It very much resonates, I think, with the general tenor that we are hearing at the European level. Energy communities was introduced with the clean energy package, and it caused a wave for the energy communities, a momentum, as you will, to emerge in the energy landscape across the European markets. However, in reality, of course, we also see that this emergence is not as expedited as we would like it to be in all of the EU member states, especially those with more limited, let's say, experience with energy communities. But now I hear that France and Sweden are also struggling despite their many decades, I think, of experience with these initiatives. I think in order to operationalize them and push them, there's a variety of things we can do at European level. I'll get into that at a later stage, but just to pick up on the importance of energy sharing, and energy sharing as an activity that is enabled through the energy communities. And essentially what we're talking about is making this off-site generation or storage capacity available to those consumers that don't have the spatial conditions or the financial conditions in order to invest in these type of technologies and thus directly access renewable energy. I think it was raised by the Swedish case, and it's very important, cannot be stretched enough. It's this virtual metering. Everyone has different terms for it, but at the end of the day, it boils down to having some administrative accounting points associated with the connection points where the final customer is operating. That final customer can then be the landlord or it can be the tenant, but it should in principle be possible for a tenant to be associated with such an accounting point so that the system operator can also see when electricity is being shared by a generation installation off-site, when how it correlates actually with the total consumption of the consumer. And I think in this regard, it is key in order to prevent us from causing imbalances to the system, that we match this consumption and off-site production as much as possible to real time and no longer than the imbalance settlement period. But energy sharing is one activity, it's one way of doing it. I think there can be a variety of actors involved in this. There can be purely local authorities steered, it can be housing organizations, whether they have a public, social or cooperative structure. They do not necessarily have to go through an energy community with the electricity market design proposal that the Commission has now put forward. That being said, of course, the energy communities is a social organization with social motives. And in this regard, there is an inherent potential to also care and tackle these energy poor and vulnerable customers, but also to help involve tenants in the energy transition. And I know Helene will talk a lot more about that, but because it's such a social structure, what is apparent to me always when I hear about these examples is that there is a voluntary redistribution of wealth to some extent within these communities even. So they would upfront financing costs, for example. They would collect donations from their members just to make sure that these type of consumers that are struggling more, that they can also get on board and be part of the energy transition. Just reflecting on the business models, but also the business case of energy sharing itself. Of course, we are in a climate where the energy prices are still at the retail market level quite high. Also at the wholesale market level, we're not at the pre-crisis level. So of course that very much contributes to building the business case and making it attractive as well for tenants or energy poor vulnerable consumers to be involved in such schemes. However, we must realize that at some point it might be that everything stabilizes again. And at that point, it might not be the most affordable option for the tenant or the energy poor and vulnerable consumer. So there should always be this possibility also to opt out of these schemes, to switch away. Consumer protection within these schemes as individual rights is very much important to safeguard. And we should be very careful in designing also the monetary incentives to optimize the business case for energy sharing. So I hear taxes, and I hear about network tariffs. And if we talk about taxes, you could indeed argue, if I share with you for free, should I pay VAT? Could be a slogan actually. That's a valid question. In Flanders, they have answered it, for example, in their particular way. They say no if it's not for a price. So that's quite interesting. That can boost the business case subsequently, in addition to the energy component of the energy bill. For the network tariffs, I think Sweden is a very peculiar case because you have time differentiated network tariffs that are quite dynamic. I think you are a front runner across Europe. And of course, if you have dynamic time differentiated network tariffs, at time where there is a benefit to the grid, as a consequence of energy sharing within an energy community or not, then that should also be rewarded and should be reflected in your network, in your energy bill at the end of the day. I think just reducing the network tariffs altogether is something tricky as we move to capacity-based distribution network tariffs more and more across the EU member states. I think there is an argument to be made for the volumetric part of the network tariff, and we see that is also being implemented in some member states like Austria. However, those same member states, of course, also will continue to revise the impacts of such network tariffs redesigns, as you will, on the wider consumer base, the wider network users, and here it's a bit of how to say, you have to involve the tenants and energy poor and vulnerable as much in these empowerment schemes, give them structured solutions. At the same time, you need to carefully design the incentives because there can be knock-on effects on those that don't have the capacity still or don't have the opportunity still to participate. So there's an opportunity here, but there's also a potential cost that can be imposed on this particular group of consumers. So should be very, very careful with designing the incentives. As regards the grid situation, and as a final point that I'll raise on this, I think I'm not entirely sure because I didn't have the opportunity to ask the question, but if we talk about a microgrid, I have the impression that it is behind a single metering point. There is a closed distribution network with private wires, basically. I think here we have a framework for that as part of closed distribution networks, and it's also correlated with the citizen energy communities, and member states may implement this if they like. But it's certainly not something that the Commission at least has a vision for going forward. The microgrids in islands, in remote rural areas can be very useful. But in a more densely populated areas, I think the public grid should be the standard, and energy sharing should go through the public grid subsequently as well, to avoid that, of course, we get backlash from the grid owners, for example, as well, that say, well, we have our cost, we are doing our investments, we need to integrate renewables as much as possible because we have this new target by 2030 of 42.5% at least. We need to be sure that we can recover those costs as well. So to some extent, you can understand the sentiment from the system operators side, and that informs then subsequently the solution that you want to provide as well.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a key point actually, and this is how that's one of the questions we would like to put to you today is how, going a little bit beyond the energy communities, but how can we support the types of initiatives we've heard about today? So social housing providers, housing cooperatives, public housing providers who have already that scale, so they already have a reach to a large number of homes. So you mentioned, for instance, issues about not tying consumers in, so to protect them from volatility in the market. But of course, this might produce a disincentive for the investors or social housing providers to take the step to establishing an energy committee. So maybe it would be nice to hear about, from your perspective, what measures can we take to really support as much as possible those organizations who can be really key multipliers to take the step forward.
No, thank you very much. And just to pick up on that one point that you highlighted, indeed, we're moving with energy sharing potentially even to micro PPAs. And we have clauses in consumer legislation currently in the Electricity Market Directive, Article 12, paragraph 3, which gives optionality to the member states to decide when you switch away from a fixed term contract, whether you can recover some costs that were reasonably incurred. And I think this is an important clause for the Commission as well to look at as these developments further emerge and to see how that fits within the context of micro PPAs and to ensure indeed that there is this incentive for investors so that they have some certainty indeed that these consumers will stay with them. Of course, in the particular context of social housing, to some extent you have the unfortunately, the certainty to some extent that there will always be someone in that residence. So that's of course, a very particular context. In terms of what we can do to push these initiatives forward from the EU level, I think legislation is the first one, obviously. So where we see that there are barriers that can be identified across EU member states and that are very predominant, we can intervene. And I think we did that as well in reaction to the energy crisis with the energy sharing proposal in the electricity market design. I think this is a very sensible step forward, and it doesn't only operationalize energy sharing as an activity, it also gives a boost to energy communities to engage in this activity. And at the end of the day, a lot of energy communities, and I might be corrected afterwards, they are concerned about meeting their demand of their members. And that's the primary purpose, and energy sharing is ideal for that. If that's your primary purpose and you don't want to sell on the market and make a profit out of it, energy sharing is the way to go. So legislation is key. Of course, going forward, this will be quite a provision to implement for member states. They will have some time for it, but anyway, I mentioned already the IT infrastructure backbone, the accounting system that needs to be put in place. Those will be require IT investments subsequently as well, but it will also require data exchange, data management protocols, as you know. And in this regard, the Commission has also the empowerment to have an implementing act on data interoperability, and we have every intention to also have a data interoperability act on energy sharing to facilitate the structuring of these data exchanges, basically, and creating reference models for the member states. I think in terms of implementation, of course, we have our projects. So we have the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub that provides technical assistance and support on the ground to the local authorities trying to implement such schemes. We have the Energy Communities Repository and the Rural Energy Community Advisory Hub. We do tend to give favorable scoring. There's some different criteria for the evaluation when you apply for technical assistance, but social inclusiveness is certainly one that is being given extra weight in the evaluation. And I think moving forward with the Energy Communities Facility, the Commission will continue to do so as well. For next year, in addition, we have the prosumer repository planned. So we will be focusing more largely on energy sharing as an activity, less focusing on communities. So there will actually be most likely an opportunity also for social housing companies or public housing companies to also, or public structures in general, to apply for funding. We will be providing grants on the ground to energy communities.
And what can that funding be used for?
For the design of the business plans. So it's contracting of services from consultants, lawyers, economists, to see to what extent your project is feasible and can be realized. I think there where the projects are already existing and the resources are there and no assistance is further needed, learning from each other is also important. And I think it's
we heard this from
great, exactly. So it's great to be here and to hear from you and to learn. And I think we have to have structures in place to facilitate this as well. And we have now the Rural Energy Community Advisory Hub that has a network. They have like regular cafes, and they're energy communities can present their practices, which is quite exciting, and they can learn about the barriers, the action drivers, the difficulties, the experiences, the way they did it. So it's very informative, and it allows you to shorten the learning curve for other initiatives as well. I think in this regard, the Citizens Energy Forum, I need to mention as well. This is always a good way. We had energy sharing on the agenda in the breakout session. It was the 9th of November for those who watched it. Otherwise, you can still watch it on the DG Energy YouTube channel. And then we try to disentangle different models, but also look at it from the consumer point of view. What's in it for the consumer? What are the opportunities, but what are also the risks? And for tenants and energy poor and vulnerable, this is especially, I think, an interesting question to ask. Just looking at my list here, research and development. Yeah, and I think Elaine will come back to this, but the SACE project that we have currently running that is exploring innovative ways of involving vulnerable households as well in cooperatives. So identifying these good practices and testing their replicability potential is also quite key, in addition to learning from each other and having peer-to-peer exchanges on these different financing and engagement innovation strategies. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's it's a good overview. Also where this sits in the bigger push towards the decarbonization of Europe. Just I think to finish up on the point that you've raised, I think protection of vulnerable consumers definitely seems to be part of the discussions that you're having. And indeed, we're going into potentially another tough period into the winter period. I know DG Energy has also taken steps to avoid a disconnection, unnecessary disconnection, to ensure transparency of billing. And we hear also quite a lot of movements also to support social tariffs. So I think what needs to be top of our agenda here is that we need to maintain support for the green agenda, that this doesn't, so this has to be a means to an end. So we have to make sure that we are indeed bringing down bills, protecting from volatility while meeting the carbon targets. Are you happy that there's enough in place at European level? Of course, a lot of this responsibility lies with member states, but do you see any risks in a way?
I think all the instruments are there. And we work with directives, and I think the minimum harmonization we have in the toolboxes that we presented during the crisis, I think it's for the member states to see how they want to tackle this particular issue of energy poverty or vulnerability. In some member states, they tackle it entirely through their social services, and they don't see it as an energy issue to begin with. And I think we also have to respect such a tradition, as long as the end goal is achieved, where these consumers are protected. And I think what's key as well in this regard, and moving forward with the transition, it will cost us. There should be no illusion about that, but the cost should be imposed on those that can carry it. And if we move to time differentiated network tariffs, for example, or more flexibility and demand response and dynamic contracts, that requires also that you have the assets in place and the flexible devices in order to participate and get a monetary gain therefrom. If you don't have those assets, you don't have those resources, you will be disproportionately impacted, and you will see a disproportionate increase in your prices. And it's exactly this category of consumers that will be affected by that the most. So we do need, as a general guidance, think about how can we move forward in the transition, how we can start procuring flexibility from consumers, but how can we at the same time shelter also those that are not ready yet, in order that don't have flexible loads to also still have access to affordable energy.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think it's a conversation that's going to be continued, and I already find it useful to make this link between what's happening locally and the work you're doing here. Often they do seem to be two worlds apart. So thanks a lot, Achiel, for coming over. And now you've already mentioned Elaine Schocker from Bresco. Elaine, you're going to give us maybe addressing similar points that we've just indeed addressed with Achiel. So reflecting on some of the input, some of the obstacles, but also best practice we've heard from the French social housing movement and the Swedish cooperatives. But I think you've also, in the course of Energy to Peers, you've also heard from other countries and other examples. So reflecting a little bit on the obstacles and what RESCOOP is what we can do from European level with the Commission, with RESCOOP to help address those. But pick up by telling us who RESCOOP is and who you are. Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, RESCOOP is the European Federation of Citizen Energy Cooperatives. And we at the moment represent about 200,000, that's a bit much, 2,250 European or citizen energy cooperatives across Europe. And that amounts to approximately 1,500,000 energy citizens, I would say. And so yeah, that's what we do at the moment. So we're a federation at the European level. We make the connection between the local level and then the European level, make translations from exactly what Achille is telling us here into the local level, into the national level, and then also translating good practices to the European level, making sure that not everybody's inventing the wheel on their own, but that we share knowledge that is already out there, maybe that was tested being extremely successful in Italy, for example, and it's something that we can learn from in Belgium or in Sweden, or so that's what we do. I guess in that sense we're very similar as Housing Europe, just making sure that everybody is on the same page and seeing that there's a lot of good things happening, but also identifying those obstacles that we've talked about and seeing how we can address those, how we can work our way around them. So yeah, this is all very important. With specific regards to myself and the SEAS project that Achille also mentioned, this is a project that has now been running for about 2 years. So we're in the final year. It's a Horizon 2020 project. Here we are exactly looking at that issue of, okay, energy communities, they are generally, they often are seen by, critics or maybe people that are a bit skeptical of this new innovation that is taking place in the energy system. They are seeing energy communities as a bunch of white, often middle-aged men that are in there because it's lucrative, there's some money to be made there, they can have some control, and we would like to prove them wrong. We realize that there is still a lot of work to do within the energy community sector to become more inclusive towards households that are more vulnerable or are experiencing energy poverty. But we also see that potential is there in the energy community framework, in the principles that are behind setting up an energy community. Achille already mentioned it. It's a social, innovative way of governing the energy system, and it's the only one of its kind in Europe so far. So it's mentioned a couple of times before. It's regulated. It's defined. It's a defined concept in EU legislation. There's recognition for their role to tackle energy poverty, to address the volatility of the market, to address vulnerabilities in the energy system for households specifically. So this is something that we really see that is a very important element that is there, but we also recognize that energy communities are a very new element in the energy market. There's a lot of unclarity, a lot of uncertainty still there around the concept. We see even in member states that have so many beautiful examples, like Flanders, where I come from. Well, it's not a member state, it's a region. But we see that even there's a lot of uncertainty about, okay, how do we tap into that social potential that we have while still being able to survive in a very competitive market.
And this was referred to indeed by Achille.
Yeah.
So the risks indeed are potentially real. When you have a big shift in market prices, you're potentially exposing members of the energy community to higher prices at some point. So this is obviously
Yeah.
something.
That is
A worry.
true.
Mhm.
That is exactly true. What I would like to, I would like to also draw a little bit of a side note with that, or add a side note to that, is that we, one of our examples, or one of the energy cooperatives here in Belgium, Flanders, which EcoPower is a cooperative that I'm talking about. They have shown a very interesting trend during the energy crisis. So while we saw that there was a lot of volatility and the market prices were going up, they could keep their prices stable because they were selling at cost. Of course, at one point you also have to enter the market, and you have to make sure that you also still survive, and that you're not just I don't know how to say this in English, but just making sure that you're still viable as well. But because their demand and their supply and demand is well in balance, as Achille also mentioned, an energy community is often exactly established to provide in local needs. So they tend to match those together. And then as well, with the fact that you have a general assembly, you have the citizens together deciding on the prices that they ask for the energy that is being produced and being consumed. And then also the fact that renewable energy can be produced at cost, that makes that you can have a stable price against the volatility of the markets, which has just secured a very, very interesting price for customers or clients of EcoPower during the energy crisis. I think it was mentioned yesterday to me again, but I think it was around 460 euros that they were able to save against other more traditional.
Indeed, we've heard good feedback also from the social housing in Flanders, where they've rolled out, in the Astor project, they've rolled out PV panels, directly reducing tenants' bills across all of the social housing in Flanders, with the Federation VVH. Just reflecting a little bit on some of the obstacles we've heard today. So some of them have been around sort of the classics, so access to grid, the fact that the price signals are not right, so the fact that it's actually costing more indeed to share energy than not. Also, let's say a lack of capacity was mentioned in Sweden, among a grid, also lack of knowledge and a lack of business case. Maybe, and from France, we also heard that there is still a bureaucratic step to go from sharing in energy produced locally in common spaces to sharing also with individual households. So just reflecting a little bit on those obstacles and possibly others that you've heard. What maybe you want to mention other obstacles that have come up, and maybe reflection on how we should try to address them.
So it's maybe a coincidence, or maybe not because it's my job, but I had a conversation yesterday with some of with Resco Flanders, so that's the federation of the Flemish energy cooperatives. And they were also having this very I don't know how to call it, but of an internal reflection on this possibility of energy sharing, and the fact that right now it's not really a viable business model for them. There's a lot of high costs that are involved with this. There's a lot of administration involved with this. If I'm hearing it right from Achille, there's going to be a lot of legislation and new directives that are going to try to solve this. But at the moment it's a very challenging activity to undertake as an energy community, while in other member states it might exactly be this activity that is the basis of their existence, I would say.
So at the moment they're finding it easier just to send surplus back to the grid as opposed to
or for example it's being EcoPower has a supply license, for example. It's the biggest energy cooperative in Belgium, and then so the other energy cooperatives that are not suppliers in Flanders, they then provide the energy to EcoPower, and then EcoPower can serve their members as well in the energy. So it's these arrangements that are very interesting, but also EcoPower mentioned that there's a lot of administrative burden going if our clients they have the opportunity also to do individual energy sharing, and this is very burdensome because it's actually something that we do on a collective basis. We share the energy among our members. We share the energy among from one region to another. So it's exactly what they are based on. So there's a lot of technical challenges. My main focus always remains on the social challenges. And of course those two are very much connected, and I think that we also came to understand much more now since the clean energy package and since there was more recognition of the need for inclusiveness towards citizens in the energy transition, because we are on the whole just jeopardizing the success of the entire transition if we don't take into account the most vulnerable ones. But that we came to see the energy transition as something that is not purely technical and about transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables, and that's it. But that we also see that it will require a societal shift, that it will require behavioral change. So that is a very socio-technical challenge that we are facing here. And then I think it's a good reflection to make, like, okay, how are we going to take the most vulnerable on board in this transition? Because without them, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And then I think that we tend to see them always as victims in a role that we and tend to involve them in a role that we have decided for them to take on in like a sort of script that was already written, and then they can enter the stage as victims and say like, oh yeah, but this isn't working for us. But I think that we should maybe turn those roles around and also look at, okay, but maybe they can become the protagonists and tell us where things are going wrong, because they are directly experiencing where our energy system is at the moment going very, very wrong and causing a lot of health and well-being issues. So I think that's, a different way of looking at things.
I think this is a really key point indeed. We have seen in the last years just how unresilient our system was and how it put a lot of households in much more difficulty and in energy poverty. So just to finish up, I think maybe if you'd like to reflect a little bit on the social cooperative public housing sector. So as you've mentioned, they can really be key multipliers in rolling out of local energy production, decarbonisation. And you mentioned earlier the typical profile that you've seen up till now has perhaps been more homeowners, particularly with the means and the time to dedicate in establishing energy communities. So what can we do to shift a little bit and make sure we really are supporting the types of organizations we heard from at the start of this session?
Yeah, exactly. So I think what is exactly the strength also of energy communities is that they exactly offer this potential of you don't need to own your own roof to tap into the renewable energy system. And also something that we really highlight a lot is the fact that energy communities make individual investments affordable. And I know even talking about investments is something that might be out of reach for a lot of vulnerable households, and exactly the households that often live in social or public or cooperative housing. But I think there as well, I do not tend to agree with the fact that Achille mentioned that sometimes member states look at energy poverty from a social lens and that we should leave them do that. I think we need to look at this more on a system level and bring the social and the energy policies together. Because that's also where exactly because we've been working in these silos for such a long time that you can actually see big mismatches between those different types of policies. And I think doing more projects in social cooperative public housing will also teach us a lot about, okay, how can we scale this up towards new contexts, towards those households that are actually that have most to gain from this concept, from this way of interacting with the energy system. And I think also, what I said before about the victims and about, we still tend to see them as consumers and in a passive role, while others, we all have the right to become active citizens in the energy transition on a collective basis, and we all have that right that is embedded in the Renewable Energy Directive. So I think that we should strive to make it as accessible as possible. It's an obligation for member states, but these social housing projects are a very good, I think, test bed to see how far we can go with this. And there are some good examples. For example, in London, we have Repowering London, which is an organization that helps social housing tenants to set up their own energy community, and it's very empowering. Like, with the revenues that they get from their energy community, they set up community gardens, they do a lot of awareness raising. So it's not only about cheaper energy, it's also about the social cohesion, building stronger communities, and all the things that you can build around that. So
great, thanks a lot. Thank you for describing the vision from ResCoop of this inclusive, fair energy transition. A vision we also share. And let's see how this legislation develops and how together we can make sure that indeed we do manage to bring down prices in a stable way while hitting those targets. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Helene. Now we're going to, in a way, we're reaching the final part of our short session today, and we have our Director of Policy, Julien Dijol, hopefully is online, and managed to listen. Hi, Julien. You're feeling a little bit under the weather. Speaking of weather, so you're calling in from home today. But great that you were able to join. And what you're going to do is give a little bit of reaction to what you heard and an overview of Housing Europe policy asks in this whole debate.
Yes, thank you very much, Tolga, and indeed sorry for my voice. The first call of the year has come, actually. Yes, so indeed it was very interesting to see that there's clearly a consensus about the fact that we are living in a momentum, and I think you used that word, a momentum around the importance of energy communities, and more globally speaking about the renewable energy sharing. And this momentum is, I think, the combination of two things. First of all, increasingly at the EU level, policymakers agree on the fact that we need to go beyond the single building approach when we want to have the most effective impact on CO2. We all know about the limit to what energy efficiency measures can achieve in a one single building approach due to the technical nature of energy efficiency measures. We know that more and more evidence and studies show that collective solutions have a greater impact in terms of CO2 rather than single building solutions. And we also know that going beyond the single building solution is the great way to address the co-benefits of energy efficiency and fair energy transition. So increasingly we have this consensus, and actually Housing Europe and Housing Europe members have been really pushing to make sure that this recognition in the EU legislation is made of the importance of going beyond single building approach. And indeed, the other part of this momentum is due to the legislation. And indeed, we are now in a moment where a lot of new revised energy legislation have been published in the official journal of the EU. And they have all in common that they want to promote this collective approach. Let's call it like this to simplify. If I take the example of the Energy Efficiency Directive, for instance, there's, for instance, one article, Article 25, which reflects or relates to the heating and cooling planning for local authorities, an obligation for local authorities, particularly the one above 45,000 inhabitants, to do this planning and to take into account the potential of energy communities, self-consumption, and other community-led approaches. So this is something that the ED, now actually in place, will produce in terms of effect, and member states have a certain number of months to transpose that into their legislation. And we consider that it's a really good approach to have this collective thinking in terms of the decarbonization. Another example is the Renewable Energy Directive. The revised version has been indeed published very recently, and it also mentioned the importance of promoting the right or minimum level of renewable energy on site at the building level, particularly for new buildings and buildings undergoing major renovation, as long as it's technically and financially feasible. The Energy Performance of Building Directive, which is still to be published in the official journal, I mean, the discussion are ongoing, will also look at this question about building level versus more collective approach. We hope that one proposed article, which is called Article 3A, on integrated renovation will be supported by the co-legislator, because it really is about looking at all the different options to decarbonize our neighborhoods, including by setting up renewable energy communities. The Energy Performance of Building Directive will also mandate the installation of solar energy equipment on the roof of new buildings and buildings undergoing major renovation. And this is something that indeed will certainly promote and incentivize the promotion of renewable energy at the building level, but also looking at how it can be combined with the more district and collective dimension. So this momentum, as we saw, will now give rise to a number of initiatives and measures on the ground. We are at a time where we need to go from the theory to the practice, and clearly from the presentation made by Karine and Michael, we saw that we are really looking at the practice and how to go from the theory to the practice. Well, we need tools to support stakeholders to take the right decision. And I really particularly appreciate Karine's presentation, where we looked at some tools that will help, decide between the different scenario, from let's say total injection to the grid, to the collective self-consumption. And, you can also have other options like the PPA or the microgrids, which actually has been also mentioned by Michael. So I think it's important, and this is the point usually made by Housing Europe members, we need to go from theory to the practice, from the policy to the implementation. And for that, we need tools to support stakeholders like social, cooperative, and public housing providers, but also local authorities. And actually, usually it's a discussion between both, local authorities and the housing providers. And the European Commission can be very helpful. They can indeed provide for funding to support these tools, but also guidelines to help local authorities and housing providers to, better know what kind of solutions they can put in place. But very importantly for Housing Europe members is to have this idea that we need to adapt to the local circumstances. We need to adapt to the local sources of energy, and we need to adapt to the availability of the technologies on the ground. Sometimes it can be indeed through PV panels, but sometimes it can be through green district heating. And the local energy communities have to take place within this local discussion, local strategy, and decisions about the best way forward. To end up my points, I wanted to refer to one question that has been actually put in the Q&A on the chat. One attendant say that and I quote, for tenants in energy poverty, since their energy consumption are already low, building a business case for them based on energy savings is often not possible or valuable. So how do we do, basically? I think this is a very good point we've made through the discussion this morning, is what do we do for local income households? So that's the transition that we are talking about is not detrimental, but is more something that will help them being empowered. And I think we, as a social cooperative and public housing providers, we are very well placed. In a way, we are privileged to have this relationship with the tenants, so that we make sure that they do not suffer from energy poverty, or at least not or less than in other segments of the housing stock. And we also are privileged that we can take the best decision, taking into account different aspects in terms of CO2 savings, of course, but more importantly for people in terms of energy bills. I think really what tenants or what residents are looking at are energy bills and how we can reduce energy bills. And one great way to do it is, of course, to reduce the demand. So that's why energy efficiency measures are still very important. And the social cooperative and public housing providers are front runners in that case. And the other way to reduce the energy bills is to make sure that the unit of energy is less costly. And producing your energy on site is a great way to do that. But of course, we also have to be clear, as Achille mentioned, and I will finish like that, that the vision for the future is not a vision of single buildings being separated and having their microgrids. I mean, the public grids and the big infrastructure will still be very useful also to combat energy poverty. So the vision of the future is not a future where we're going to replace the grid by buildings as a energy plants, let's say, but it's more a future where we're going to use the capacity of the buildings to reduce the stress on the grid, so that the grid can concentrate on the massive challenge of the electrification. And therefore, public and social and cooperative housing providers have a role to play in that circumstances, while maintaining their primary focus, which is indeed providing affordable homes. So I think we are up to many years of challenging implementation of the rules. And of course, the European Commission will be a key partner in not only making a stock-taking exercise, but also providing the necessary support for that. So I think I will finish here, Soka, and over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Julien. I think it's a good way to wrap up. Indeed, we need to go beyond the building approach, go to the neighborhood approach. And of course, this is not only about the supply of renewable electricity, but also cleaner ways to heat our homes, so district approaches to heating and cooling. And of course, you touched on the point of renovation. So it's a complex legislative environment for public social housing providers right now. They have to come up with the best strategy to decarbonize the homes in the most efficient way. Some of that indeed coming from local interventions. But we hope that starting this conversation today and continuing, of course, online, we have just set up a new LinkedIn page, Dialogue Shaping Communities, where we will be adding also all of the resources and discussions that we had today. In addition also to the possible financial opportunities mentioned by the European Commission and by RES Group here today. So we will be using that LinkedIn page to continue the conversation, which is going to be indeed also continued with our next webinar. If you can remind me of the dates. The 30th of November, we will continue this series of innovation bites. So I hope you can also join us on that occasion. There we will be looking at indeed the embedded energy, so that how we can reduce also the carbon emissions of the stock in the building phase as well as the use phase. So it's another crucial topic that housing providers are facing. So thank you very much for joining us today, and please link in to the LinkedIn page. We can share that with you, and let's stay in touch. Thank you very much.